Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of UBS Road to the Election, an Election Watch series. I'm really excited to welcome today's guest, Shane Lieberman, Senior Government Affairs Advisor from UBS Office of Public Policy. Shane, welcome to the show. Great to have you join us.
Thank you, Anthony. Great to be back with you.
Great. So, Shane, we planned this ahead of the announcement that came in from Kamala Harris's, Vice President Harris's team about her vice presidential pick, which everybody was speculating over for the last couple of weeks. And within the nick of time, we found out that it was Minnesota Governor Tim Walz. So the first question I ask is, because I think everybody Googled this today, who is Tim Walz?
No, I think you're right. And I even saw a poll that said some 70% of Americans don't know who he is. So you're not the only person trying to figure out who he is. 6-year-old governor of Minnesota, and he's in his second term. Prior to that, he served in the House of Representatives for, I think it was 12 years. But he was born and raised in Nebraska, served in the National Guard for many years, was in the artillery, which actually led him to lose his hearing a little bit, and eventually, spurred his interest in public service, and wanted to try and do things for veterans' benefits, and that got him to run for Congress. But he also was a school teacher and a football coach. So I think he has a resume that speaks to a lot of different demographics. And I think you'll see over the coming days and weeks his story being told to try and resonate with the voters that are unfamiliar with him.
So one thing I've read in a few different articles is that what most people are saying is he brings a quote-unquote Midwestern charm. And so I think what they mean by that is what you just described. He seems to be kind of a man of the community, being a teacher and a coach, and then obviously getting into public office after his stint with the Army National Guard. But so let's dig down into the details here, because there hasn't been too much yet on what VP Harris will bring as far as policies if she becomes the president, although there's a lot of speculation that she'll run a lot on many of President Biden's policies. But that notwithstanding, what policies, public and economic, do we know that Tim Walz stands on right now?
Yeah, no, Tim Walz, being the governor for several years, has some accomplishments that I think Vice President Harris and he will tout in the coming weeks and months. I think very notably, Minnesota passed a law to expand family medical leave. Also, when they did their budgets, he provided a tax credit for low-income residents of Minnesota. So I think there's going to be plenty of us to learn about his policies. You'll also see things that Republicans grasp and try and use to define them in a manner that will help Republicans. For example, there's a lot of conversation about a law that he signed into law that would give driver's licenses to undocumented immigrants.
Yeah, and there's some other interesting things that he's done. He currently chairs the Democratic Governors Association. He's co-chairs for the Rules Committee. He's also done quite a lot for other organizations, when it came to like school lunches. And, so I know that obviously, like you're saying, we're going to learn a lot more about him over the next couple of weeks. And obviously, we've got the Democratic National Convention coming up also on the 19th of August. So I'm sure that's going to be a really big opportunity for him to essentially introduce himself to the American public. So let me ask, this is probably the biggest question, and I can't imagine this question wasn't coming up as Kamala Harris's team was vetting the right candidates to be her VP pick. Can he appeal to the undecideds and the independents? It's all about getting those battleground states to vote for your party, which is what both candidates want to do. Can he appeal to them?
Yeah, I think that was some of the appeal to making him the VP pick. We kind of see him as the safe pick. Given his roots, he is a plain-spoken guy who I think will be able to connect with certain undecided voters, especially in key states like Michigan and Wisconsin. I think that he can be that guy to help Vice President Harris on the campaign trail really resonate. Now, the reality is, though, she's top of the ticket, so he may not be the headline that she is. So he's playing second fiddle, but I think this was a strategic pick for Harris to try and really connect with those voters.
Yeah, and we heard a little bit from him and other potential candidates. We had, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro in the mix. We even had Pete Buttigieg, Mark Kelly, Senator Mark Kelly. So there's been, these men have been out there making statements and making waves and talking about the Trump-Vance ticket and what it means if Harris was president. So we have heard a little bit from him. But now that we know that this is the ticket, we've got Trump and Vance, we've got Harris and Walz. How does this race stack up? And I know, by the way, I'm asking you this question as polling data is consistently and constantly being updated because it's been such a fast-moving series of events over the last couple of weeks. But what do we know now about that race?
Well, I think it's completely developing day by day. To your point, where Walz is unknown, Harris to some degree is an unknown. So the Harris-Walz ticket is going to be spending a lot of time and energy over the next few days and weeks trying to define themselves versus Trump defining them. So you're going to see some really big clashes about how they are presented, and the records are presented. So, that I think is going to be almost one of the defining fights of who gets their message across and kind of ingrains it in those the minds of the voters in those states that are going to matter and decide this election, which we all know are kind of the handful of states of, including Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia, and maybe North Carolina.
Shane, also, let's not, you were talking about swing states, but I mean, Minnesota is not considered a swing state, but, in his gubernatorial run, Walz did run against a Republican incumbent who was favored to win that state. So he has come up against Republicans before and won successfully. But again, not being a swing state, that's where we're going to be, of course, focusing most busily on election night, and more to come on that, and even down to the individual counties and towns that make a lot of decisions about how the Electoral College will go. But before I let you go, Shane, here's probably the big question that a lot of people are asking, maybe today, maybe they did when Vance was picked. How important, or maybe on the flip side, not important, is the vice president pick to the success of the overall campaign?
Historically, it's actually not that important. If you look back, when I looked for an example of where it made a difference, I think I had to go all the way back to 1960 when LBJ helped JFK win Texas, which was very important to his victory. I think more recently, you could look at Sarah Palin. While there was a lot of excitement around her, the announcement of her being on the ticket, eventually, she didn't pan out to be as strong of a VP candidate as hoped. So you could argue that, she hurt the ticket. But at the end of the day, the vice presidential candidate typically is not, the make all or break all for the presidential race. It really comes down to, the primary key figures. And in this case, it would be Vice President Harris against former President Trump.
Right. And let's not forget also that the writers and actors over at Saturday Night Live are probably scrambling now to figure out who's going to play Vance and Walz in the upcoming fall season, which I'm sure we're all going to be tuning into. But Shane, on a serious note, thank you so much for taking us on this journey, because as we said right at the beginning, there's little that we know about Tim Walz, but we will get to know more over the coming days. But it was nice to kind of get a little bit of a setup here from you so we can kind of go into the rest of the week with a little bit more information on our side. Shane Lieberman, always good to see you, my friend. Thanks for joining us.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Anthony.
Great. Shane, again, who's UBS's Senior Government Affairs Advisor. And thank you all for joining us. There's lots more shows coming down the pike, as you can imagine, as election season is only heating up more and more. And there's a lot more information where that came from. So please visit our website at ubs.com/election watch. The other episodes in this series are there. Plus, you've got a lot of other election-related content, including our publications and blogs. And if you'd like to continue this conversation, make sure that you are reaching out to your financial advisor. Until next time, I'm Anthony Pastore. We wish you a great day, everybody. See you soon.